afternoon, everybody. I'd like to call to order the Public Works Committee meeting for Tuesday, August 30th, 2016. Brenda, whenever you're ready, we can do roll call and determination of quorum, please. Here. Thank you, Brenda. Next order of business is to adopt the agenda. I would either take a motion or any suggested changes.
Move to approve. Second.
Motion to approve by Estes, second by Solomon. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Agenda is adopted. Now is the time for general public comment, which is a time for members of the public to discuss or express concerns to the committee on any issue not limited to items on the agenda. Action, however, will not be taken at the meeting on any issue not on the agenda except by placement thereon by unanimous vote of the aldermen present. I have no general public comment forms, so we will go ahead and move on to consent items 1 through 15. We'll open public comment, and I will close public comment, seeing no speaker forms. Anyone care to remove an item? Mr. Estes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to remove item 10, please.
Number 10. Mr. Nordstrom, same one?
Same one.
Okay. Then I would look for a motion to adopt the consent items 1 through 15 with the exception of number 10. Motion by Drew, second by Solomon. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Consent calendar items 1 through 15 are adopted with the exception of number 10. Item number 10 is to authorize staff to seek proposals for utility rate study, an estimated cost of $200,000. And I will go to Mr. Estes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Move to approve, and if I get a second, I'd like to keep the floor. Thank you. Just for the public's information, if I could ask Public Works Director Dale Tech. Dale, could you just please remind everybody what utility is getting the rate study and how long it's been since the last one?
Most certainly. Excuse me. The Water and Wastewater Enterprise Fund, so our water and sewer utilities are covered under this proposed rate study. We're in the process of updating what we call our utility system master plans for both of those utilities, and it looks like those plans look at the condition of our existing system, where we need to expand for future growth of the city, gives recommendations on how our future utilities need to be operated and maintained properly. Going along with that, this rate study is the second part of that to make sure that the funding that we have is legally defensible. We don't want to charge too much. We don't want to charge too little. We want to charge just right so that we have viable utility systems. Back in, I believe, 2007 was the last time that we went through this process. I believe in 2008, the last rate study was done, and those rates took effect in, I believe, 2008 or 9, and went through the year 2013. So the rates we're charging now have not been increased since 2013. We've been sitting stagnant with our rates until we get through this process of being able to do a rate study to see what the rates should be.
Thank you. I yield, Madam Chair.
So we do have a motion by Estes, second by Nordstrom to approve. We'll go to Alderman Nordstrom for discussion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a follow-up question for the Public Works Director, if I may.
Yes, sir.
Dale, can you give us a comparison on this price for $200,000 compared with other studies within this same division that's done previous rate studies, and is this in the ballpark?
I believe it is. I believe this is fairly consistent with the previous rate study that was done, yes.
Thank you. I'll yield.
Alderwoman Drew.
I also have a question for Dale Tech.
Yes, ma'am.
So the last study was done in 2007 with a rate increase in 2008, is that correct? And then you said there hasn't been another rate increase since 2013?
Correct. There were annual increases from 2008 to 2013, but
okay.
the rate structure we're currently operating here in the year 2016 are the 2013 rates.
Okay. I just need some clarity on that since I wasn't here for the first study, so thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, once again, I do have a motion and a second to approve item number 10. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion 10 passes. Item number 10 passes. We're now at the end of consent calendar and on to non-consent items 16 through 19. Seeing no speaker request forms, I will open and close public comment. We'll move on to item number 16, which is the concourse, turbine, homestead, street area, sidewalks discussion. Alderman Estes, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, this item obviously is got put on the agenda as a result of out at our industrial park, RPM applying for a building permit and trying to understand who does and who doesn't have to put sidewalks in, and knowing that we as a city have the authority to order in sidewalks wherever we feel the need to, and then it comes down to fairness issue too. Having an ordinance that's fair and making sure that if we require somebody to put sidewalks, that it's not a sidewalk to nowhere as such. And so it brought up the issue of the entire industrial park, and I might have some of this wrong, but when the industrial park was first created, and an ordinance was such that prior to 2008, that if land was zoned light industrial, sidewalks weren't required. Well, and that, but I don't know when that industrial park started, but after 2008, sidewalks are required on any residential or commercial building, and of course, there's an amendment now to say all buildings. But the bottom line is that we have a beautiful industrial park. We're trying to be, as Rapid City, we're trying to be a leader in the region. We try to create jobs, and we have an industrial park that, in my mind, needs sidewalks. And it's easy for me to sit here and tell you guys that I think somebody in a ward that's not mine, by God, let's order sidewalks in. So what this really is I'm going to ask, if you allow me, Madam Chair, Dale text some questions, and I think we want to take a look at hopefully maybe some sidewalk projects in everybody's ward to try to do an ad campaign. Sidewalks are coming to a place near you. But if I could, Madam Chair, I'd like to ask Alderman Tech or Public Works Director Dale Tech some questions. Dale, in the ordering in process, could you explain to the council the process of if we order in sidewalks?
I'll do my very best, but yes. First, you need to decide where you're going to order sidewalks in, and that, I think, will be a process that staff will provide you some information. I've already directed staff to start looking at areas in town, throughout town, that we believe would be good candidates for that, based on the properties being developed, lack of sidewalks, worn paths in the grass where people are obviously walking, things of that nature. So we'll be looking all over town to hopefully bring the council some areas that would be good candidates for you to consider ordering in sidewalks. Once that's done and you've actually ordered in sidewalks in an area, we will notify those property owners by certified mail. At that time, then they'll have the opportunity to appear at the next Public Works meeting for them to voice their opinion on that. Then at that time, we'll put together a proposed resolution of necessity, and really all that is a list of the property owners and what they're going to be assessed for, and that's the installation of sidewalks. We'll give those property owners a certain amount of time to put the sidewalks in themselves, and then if they don't, the city will initiate a project to go in and install the sidewalks, and then an assessment roll will be brought to the council, and then the property owners will be assessed the cost of those sidewalks, I believe, over a 5-year period on their property taxes. So in a nutshell, that's the process.
Thank you. And when we do that, some property owners may choose to put the sidewalks in themselves. However, when we pass the ordinance to order in those sidewalks, we have to have a funding source in case we have to, at that time, do we not? Because we have to be able to perform on our end.
Correct. The city does have a funding source. It's called the SAB 28 fund, I believe, and SAB stands for Special Assessment Bond. And it's more or less money set aside for doing assessed projects. It's a revolving fund, if you will, that we have money in the bank to be able to pay for these costs up front and then get money returned based on the assessment to the property owners.
Thank you. Do you have a time frame in mind when you might be able to report to the council of maybe some projects you might have in mind in each ward?
I believe at the very earliest, it'd be the second council meeting or Public Works Committee meeting in September. I would almost like to take that to the 1st of September. Really, there's not enough construction time left this year. If we start the process of telling people they got to get the sidewalks in, we're going to be up against winter, or they will be. So quite honestly, it'll be next year before people have an opportunity to get their sidewalks installed without having to fight with cold weather.
Thank you. You know, I think we want to take that time. Where I sit on the industrial park right now is if at the end result, that ward, that's not where the sidewalk project is, I just hope that then we go back and relieve Mr. Mudge of his duties to not have to put that stretch of sidewalk into that building we did the last time. I mean, that's all. That's my train of thought on that industrial park is that if we don't end up ordering in sidewalks in that ward, if we order, there's a project somewhere else that those representatives would rather have it, and it is not that industrial park, then I hope we relieve Mr. Mudge of that requirement to put in, a little stretch of sidewalk, because in my mind, I voted on it thinking that we're going to try to get that whole entire industrial park brought up to speed. But, so I can't make a motion, but I guess for right now, I just hope that we have a motion to acknowledge and we await the Public Works report on a per ward basis. Thank you.
I'd like to point a clarification real quick. Mr. Tech, would you need a motion for us to move forward with that report request, or are you already intent on bringing it forward?
We're already working on it, so I don't believe that a motion would be necessary. Acknowledgement, I think, of the discussion would be appropriate at this time.
Mr. Nordstrom, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I may be asking the same questions, but in a little bit different direction. And I'm in Ward 2, is where these sidewalks are going to be looked at for ordering in. And I want to emphasize the part about just being reviewed and not an order in today type situation. And that's just a point of clarification, because I agree with Alderman Estes that these need to be put in, but I'm not certain that these are the highest priority areas that need to be considered. So I'm looking forward to seeing the plan come forward from the Public Works Department on the sidewalks to be installed. And if I can ask Mr. Tech a couple of questions.
Certainly.
Mr. Tech, right now, the City Council has primarily been using the tool that we have available to us called the WARPS, Waiver of Right Protest. Normally, we're overruling the staff on those decisions coming forward from the staff as far as recommending that they be put in. But at the same time, we're doing these warps, and I don't agree with them at this point. So have you considered putting together, in addition with the walk audit that was presented a 3 years ago, your plan that include the coming forward? And I know we won't make it this fall, but and I'm not that big of a hurry for it anyway, but I do want to support it. But will we be able to use the walk audit within your analysis for where sidewalks need to be installed?
Very good question. Yeah, the walk audit will be utilized as a tool as part of this analysis. Certainly a very valuable report, and I can't say that it's going to drive 100% of the areas that need to be looked at, but certainly a lot of the recommendations in there will be compared with where we find other needs. So it'll be a tool used in the selection process, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Tick. Another question for you as far as the ordinances coming forward. And again, I'm wanting to take our time with coming forward with a plan. So for me, this ordinance changes, in effect, will give us a little more support, in my mind, the way I'm reading it, in coming forward with a plan, if you will, first, and then as we go through the changes of the ordinances, will that also work into your time frame as well, developing this plan?
In my opinion, they're two separate issues. The ordinance amendment really just is to clarify that when you get a building permit and building a structure on your property, that's the time to put sidewalk in. Staff believes that still is the appropriate time for people to install sidewalks. If you're the first one in the neighborhood, you got to be the first one to put your sidewalk in. If you're the 10th one, you got to put them in. So it makes sense as the appropriate place to install sidewalks. So the recommendations that we're going to be bringing back to you are kind of not really even tied to the ordinance. So that's a completely separate issue.
Understand. Thank you. And then the condition where we have sidewalks leading into nowhere, do we have the technology available to us, or is there a technology out there that would support, say, for example, the sidewalk ends on a lot, and is there a way to protect that end so that it isn't destroyed or it goes away? Or I understand there will be some damage to the ends of those sidewalks, but do we have that technology available that would somewhat protect the ends of the sidewalks?
Typically, the sidewalk ends aren't really damaged unless there's subsequent development going on that vacant lot. So we haven't really seen that as an issue where you get a lot of throwaway sidewalk due to the adjoining property building it. They are usually very mindful of the location of the existing sidewalk and protect that so they don't have additional costs in repairing or replacing that if they damage it.
Thank you. And as far as the condition that RPM is placed in right now, I believe Mr. Mudge presented a very solid plan to come forward as he develops that property out there and then installing the sidewalks. So I'm comfortable with Mr. Mudge's recommendations, and so if we can able to move forward as the city council and the city presents to him what he would like to do with that sidewalk installation, I can fully support what his direction is going for, and I'm looking forward to also working on this ordinance. And I appreciate the staff for coming forward with some additional recommendations above and beyond what we felt needed. But thank you, Madam Chair. I'll yield.
Thank you, Mr. Nordstrom. We'll go to City Attorney Joel Landing.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to address a few of the issues that Alderman Nordstrom raised. First, on the waiver of right to protest, in relation to sidewalks in particular, I would recommend that you not continue to require a waiver of right to protest. In fact, I have, of my own accord, put an item on tomorrow's agenda, legal finance, to remove a stipulation for a warp that the applicant is opposed to. I think warp started out as a good idea, but legally there's really no effect, especially with sidewalks. The applicant or the landowner has no legal right to protest the city ordering in the sidewalk. Now, they can always come to the city council and ask that you not impose that requirement or that you not order in their sidewalk. That is different than the kind of protest that a waiver of right to protest contemplates. For street projects, if a certain number of landowners along a street project object to that project, they can legally block that project. So there is a legal protest that gives them some rights that they wouldn't normally have. So the waiver of right to protest was originally created to address that situation where somebody had a formal legal right to protest and they were giving up that right. Again, with sidewalks, they don't have that right, so legally, the waiver of right to protest serves no purpose other than, in my opinion, it makes the council feel like you've done something to try to secure the sidewalks in the future. But unfortunately, it becomes a document that then is filed in the chain of title, and you have these documents in the chain of title, and landowners are rightfully concerned about that. So my advice is to stop doing waiver of right to protest on sidewalks in particular. But frankly, I think we need to have a larger discussion of how we've been using waivers of right to protest and whether that's an appropriate mechanism to, I guess, waive subdivision requirements in the future. Second thing I wanted to address, and I may part with the city engineer a little bit on this, although I'm not trying to advocate there's one best way to install sidewalks. Right now, the policy of the city is, as was indicated, to install sidewalks at the time a building permit is pulled or there's actual construction on the lot. I would just note that that is not the way we have always handled the installation of sidewalks, and that if you are concerned with our sidewalk policies and how sidewalks are installed and want to take a look at that, I would just encourage you to open your minds and maybe go back to what I would call square one, is looking at how we used to do it, which is the sidewalk was a piece of infrastructure that was installed by the developer at the time of platting, just like streets and water and sewer. It was something that they had to post surety for, and it was something the developer was required to do. Now, I will say there was opposition to that because the developer would install the sidewalk, and then when construction, or they wouldn't, that was a big bone of contention, so we couldn't final out projects because they wouldn't install the sidewalk until there was build out, because when construction started, the contractors would drive over the sidewalks and things and break up the sidewalk. So the developers, rather than view that as a contractor problem, because there are ways the contractors could avoid destroying the sidewalks, they viewed it as a city problem for making them install the sidewalks at the time the development was created. But philosophically, if you're looking at it, it's something that I think you should at least look at or consider, because at that point, all the sidewalks in the entire development, you have one person that's responsible for them, you have surety for it. And frankly, if we were better at enforcing it and saying, no, you have to install this, rather than letting them wait until after the lots had developed, you would have the sidewalk installed, and you wouldn't have to necessarily worry about it with the building permit. The benefit of this is you're not going to have the discontinuous sidewalk sections. When you wait for the buildings to be built, you're going to always have a few lots that aren't built on, and so you'll have these discontinuous sections. Whereas if you do it as part of the platting, you will have all continuous network throughout the development. Again, I think a lot of the developers will push back on this because they didn't like it. So I don't know if it's the best way to do it or not. I'm just saying it's an option out there. And maybe if you're unhappy with the current situation, something that you could look at again and decide, and obviously weigh it compared to the concerns of the development community with what you want to accomplish when it comes to sidewalks. The problem with, in my opinion, the way we're doing it now, because you're waiting for a building permit, it's real easy when the first guy comes in and pulls the first permit and says there's no sidewalk for, 8 blocks on either side of me. So you can say, oh, well, yeah, I don't see why you should install the sidewalk. Well, then the next guy comes in, well, you've already granted the first variance, so it's hard to not grant the variance to the second guy. And eventually you have 6, 7 lots that are developed and no sidewalks because everybody's gotten a variance. What we haven't been good about, and what you're kind of talking about doing now, is now going back and retroactively looking at it and saying, okay, now we're going to install sidewalks. This is something that I think no matter what your policy is, it's going to be tough for city staff to track and say, okay, well, this development, we finally hit the tipping point where now it's time to come back and consider ordering in sidewalks. So unless somebody comes and complains, or there's a variance request like you have now where you've looked at it and say, hey, wait a minute, there's a lot of buildings here, maybe we should start considering the sidewalk. it's just probably an issue that's never going to get addressed in the future once you start granting variances, unless somebody complains or you have a situation where somebody comes in and requests a variance and like now it gets pointed out to you. For staff to go back and monitor all over town, every subdivision, and try to decide when it's time to bring it to the council's attention to have sidewalks ordered in, it is probably one of the things that frankly is going to drop through the cracks and not really get done. So something for you to chew on, I guess, as you decide or continue thinking about how to handle sidewalks into the future.
Alderman Solomon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of points. Thank you to the city attorney for his remarks. I think one thing I've noticed during my brief time on city council is maybe some lack of clarity in our ordinance. And thankfully, I think we're going to get that clarified now. So I appreciate the city staff for their work on that. And two, we have some consistency issues on city council with how we decide to do variances and so on. And so hopefully we can get to a point where we kind of decide what do we make these exceptions on? What other than just we didn't do it the last time, we didn't do it the last time. Maybe there should be more concrete ways that we decide, such as topography and so on. And so clarity and consistency, I think, is what we need on this sidewalk issue. And if I may, Madam Chair, ask a question of Dale Tech.
Sure.
Dale, when was the last time we actually ordered in a sidewalk assessment?
I think it's been done once in the 8.5 years I've been here, but I don't recall specifically where that was.
Okay. So not a very common practice?
No.
To go back and retrofit this? Okay. And that's probably something for us to keep in mind, is the city is not used to that sort of thing. And so as we look at this issue, and I'm not sure where I stand on the assessment yet, but I think we definitely, moving forward, we should be more clear and consistent with sidewalks. And so I guess I would just urge my fellow council members to keep that in mind as we move forward. So I'll yield the floor. Thank you.
Alderwoman Drew.
Just a quick move to acknowledge the discussion. Yield.
Motion to acknowledge by Drew, second by Estes. Since I haven't spoken yet, I would like a couple question for Mr. Landine. If we were to eliminate warps altogether, would that release any existing warps from from those chains of title? Make them just nullify them?
No, I think it was a stipulation for approval unless you formally took some action to waive those warps. It would not. However, I would also be concerned because there probably are some warps that are related to street projects. And so I would prefer to handle them on more of a case-by-case basis, but we could maybe craft some things. I will say that, we have had landowners come to us when there was an agreement or covenant or something, and we try to work with them as best we can to release those when they're no longer needed. And I certainly, if somebody came in and they had a warp for a sidewalk or something and they wanted it removed, would work with them to get that removed. Maybe some sort of blanket approval that delegated to staff the authority to get rid of those if we needed to, and then if we felt they were needed, then only those, and the landowner disagreed, then they could take those to the council. So at least it would limit the amount of ones you saw, and we could clean up the easy ones. And we don't get a lot of requests. Usually it's covenant agreements that people are concerned about, but the warp is something on the chain of title, and I'm assuming it causes some concern with people. And although if you've ever bought property before, you get dumped a ream of documents in front of you, and even as a lawyer, I can honestly say I didn't probably go through all of the ones that were dumped in front of me when I bought my house. So, I just, as a lawyer, I philosophically disagree with filing something in a chain of title that really serves no legal purpose.
Thank you. Well, it is something to think about. And then Mr. Tech, it's been a few years, but did we assess order in sidewalks for Reddale? There were also some traffic calming improvements. And then Canyon Lake Drive, was that another one?
Yes, that is correct. That would be a most recent example. And I should probably clarify my comments. We actually do an assessed sidewalk project nearly every year, but that's typically a code enforcement thing where they're broken, damaged sidewalks that are hazards that get replaced. But yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, for bringing those projects up, because yes, they were definitely ordered in.
And in these two cases, they were just non-existent, so
They were, right, they were non-existent in some areas. Some people had the sidewalk, some people didn't, and it made a corridor that was walkable.
okay, thank you. Mr. Nordstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. An excellent memory. Just wanted to remind the folks here too, and I'm just talking about, and maybe directing follow-up comments to what our city attorney addressed as far as warps, and I'm just addressing just sidewalks and not warps for street construction, but to remind the city council that a lot of the situations that are taking place because of warps, the future landowners or maybe even current property owners are having to pick up the costs for those installations of sidewalks that have to be done. And whereas the developer is avoiding that cost at the beginning, where it probably is less expensive for the developer to do it with the equipment and the instruction that they have at their resources. And so it's just an additional cost to the current property owners if we continue doing warps as well. Thank you. And again, I'm just talking about sidewalk warps and not streets. Thank you.
Well, there are some street ones that you're going to be hearing about too that council's way in the past approved that we're going to be dealing with. So I do have a motion and a second to acknowledge this discussion. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. All opposed, same sign. Item number 16 is acknowledged. Item number 17, Elkvale Road Safety Concerns. Mr. Estes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I make a motion that we ask Public Works Director Dale Tech to invite the DOT to a Public Works meeting in the future as soon as practical to discuss the Elkville, Minnesota intersection and bring us all up to speed on the required warrants for that traffic signal installation.
Could I get a second? Second. Motion by Estes, second by Nordstrom.
If I could just...
Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
Thank you. And Dale, I'm trying to remember if there were some other traffic issues along that way, but I know specifically, I believe there's a traffic signal sitting in a storeroom that a TIF or contractor's paid for, and it can't be installed there because of insufficient warrants as calculated by the state DOT. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. The Elkvale Road is under the jurisdiction of South Dakota Department of Transportation. As part of the development, you're exactly right. There was traffic signal equipment that was purchased. The DOT will not allow a signal to go up unless there are warrants that are met. They look at them periodically. I did contact the DOT the other day. They had indicated they had done another count, and they were in the process of updating the warrant study to see where the numbers fell, and they'd be indicated they'd be happy to come to a meeting here in the near future. I can't speak to them as to when that'll be, but I'll be sure to invite them and make sure that they have a time frame in mind, and if it's something beyond what I think is appropriate, I'll bring that back to the committee.
Thank you. I yield.
Alderman Nordstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to follow up on what Alderman Estes has commented on, I was at let's see, I want to call it a group organization that was meeting on Mount Rushmore Road, and this topic came up on that for Elkville Road installing the signals down there at East Minnesota. At that time, they were suggesting that the warrants were not being met to justify installing a signal at that intersection. And so I think we're going to have to do some heavy lifting to get them on board to agree that a signal of some kind needs to be installed at that intersection. At the same time, we have to be careful with requiring installations of that. If it doesn't meet warrants, then we become liable as well. So just want to caution the council and what direction we're going to be going on that intersection. So that's the comments that I was given to by the DOT at that informal meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nordstrom. Any further discussion? I do have a motion to invite Department of Transportation here at some point in the future to present the findings of their warrant analysis that is ongoing currently. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. All opposed, same sign. Item 17 carries. Item number 18 is a request from James Tiltram for a variance to waive the requirement to install sidewalk per City Ordinance 12.08.060 along Century Road, Rapid City. Alderman Estes.
Move to deny.
I have a motion to deny by Estes, second by Nordstrom. Any discussion? Are you going to ask a question? Okay. Mr. Solomon.
A question for Dale Tech, if I could.
Yes, sir.
Dale, if we go ahead and deny this, can you clarify exactly where, if the sidewalk's going to go all the way to Elkvale, or where it's going to end, and where the property line on the parcel?
Yeah, the site plan that the applicant submitted shows the sidewalk being located on the property line. There is a significant portion of right-of-way there adjacent to Century Road. This sidewalk is along Century Road. It doesn't go laterally along with North Street. So per ordinance, the city engineer can direct where the location of that sidewalk needs to be. So I believe there's an attached exhibit as well that it's our recommendation to move the sidewalk closer to Century Road so it's a better pedestrian access. And then it'll stop at the property line of the applicant.
Okay, I just want to make sure, we don't want them to do more sidewalk than they have to on the property
Precisely.
owners. So just to be fair to them as you're assessing that, I'm sure you will be. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Solomon. I do have a motion and a second for denial. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. All opposed, same sign. Item number 18 is denied. Item number 19, introduction and first reading of ordinance number 6139, an ordinance to clarify requirements for installation of sidewalks by amending chapter 12.08 of the Rapid City Municipal Code. I have a motion to approve by Nordstrom, second by Drew. Would you like to maintain the floor, Mr. Nordstrom?
If I may for just a moment.
Sure.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to reiterate, I appreciate the staff's putting the above and beyond what I felt needed to be in the ordinance, but I'm very okay with it. The section that I felt that needed to be addressed, and maybe this is a question for the city attorney, just making sure we understand the deletion of residential or commercial in section 1208-060, paragraph A. For me, it's on the third line, removing that residential and commercial. First of all, thank you, and can you give us additional information on why we went that direction?
Mr. Landine?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you're aware, there was an applicant who raised a concern and said because it didn't stay industrial, that obviously they meant to exclude, or it obviously excluded industrial buildings. Well, when you do some research into it, under the International Building Code, there's two classifications of buildings, and residential and commercial, and industrial are subclassification of commercial buildings. So when we looked at the ordinance trying to determine, okay, was this written improperly? Was it meant to exclude industrial buildings? And you go back and look at the adoption of the ordinance in 2008, there was a specific exclusion that said industrial zoned lots were excluded. That exclusion was removed based on the classification of buildings in the International Building Code, where industrial buildings are included under commercial buildings. It was the city attorney's office interpretation of the ordinance that the ordinance applied to all buildings. And I think part of the confusion arose from there's classifications of buildings and there's classification of uses of property. And industrial is a separate classification of use of property, but the reference in the ordinance was to buildings. However, even though it had been 8 years since we adopted the ordinance and we'd enforced it consistently through that 8 years, and nobody had ever raised the issue that industrial buildings were excluded, because the argument seemed to be taking some root or was causing problems, rather than try to litigate it and convince a judge that our interpretation was the correct interpretation of the ordinance, the easiest course of action, and in order to hopefully avoid any litigation in the future, was just to remove the reference to specific buildings so it's clear that all buildings require a sidewalk.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate the answer. Thank you. I'll yield.
Okay, there is a motion and a second on the floor to approve this first reading. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Aye. All opposed, same sign. Item number 19 carries. I would look for a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion to adjourn by Estes, second by Solomon. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? All opposed, same sign. We are adjourned. Thanks, everybody.